Computer. Hi, everybody. How are you? This is Ryan with Cattler Conversations, our second episode. Today we are joined by Alfredo DiCostanzo. Alfredo, could you introduce yourself, please? Name, occupation, and area of expertise.
Yes, Ryan, thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Alfredo DiCostanzo. I work for University of Nebraska Extension, deployed as a county extension educator in the area of livestock systems, specifically beef cattle production systems. And I've served this role for about 2 years, completed about almost 30 years at the University of Minnesota as a professor in extension, research, and teaching.
Perfect. Excellent. So a lot of studies and two great places to live. And going into a little bit about your history on the beef industry, what made you want to go into it? And how long have you been into it? You said 30 years, but can you give us a little bit of your history in that?
Yes, so good question there, Ryan. I grew up, I guess, wanting to get close to horses when I was very, very young. I mean, we're talking almost baby time, by the way. And then, about age 10, I discovered that my family, the extended family, had a ranch, which of course my dad was a business partner in with his family. So then he started managing the ranch. That led me to get close to horses and cattle. Eventually, in a sense, you might say cattle won because I had to move away from my hometown and go to college, and so then it was a little harder to continue that part of it. But at that point, I was already decided I wanted to work in animal husbandry, animal science, and the focus then was on bovines, including both dairy and beef cattle initially, with a heavy lean from the beginning on the beef industry. After that, I pursued a master's and a PhD, both in ruminant nutrition. Initially, I had an interest in reproductive physiology. I still do. I think it's a fun little area. As you mature, though, you begin to recognize that nutrition and the field that you're going to work out in probably is more fruitful if you dedicate it to nutrition of feedlot cattle. And that, I mean, selfishly, that perspective being that's where the funding would be for us back at that time. And I believe the situation continues, right? So there is, even though we will not have a beef industry unless we have cows that reproduce, we certainly seem to spend more effort and time and dollars in the feedlot nutrition area, perhaps, and the reproductive physiology is a little bit more specific to some of the newer concepts going on in that area.
Cool.
So
Yeah, and I mean, I know you also teach a lot. What have you liked about the teaching side of it as well?
yeah, that's the reference to my 30 years at Minnesota with with all three functions of the land grant system: research, extension, and teaching. I had both students in the classroom from an undergraduate perspective for beef production management classes that I taught every fall since about 1996 to about 2021 would have been my last semester I taught in the classroom. And I graduated over 30 graduate students in master's and PhD programs, obviously based on research, and conducted statewide extension programs all at the same time while managing various university feedlots at University of Minnesota. We had facilities initially in 3 or 4 locations, and then those whittled down with time to about one location, which happened to be about 5 miles from my home. And it was a very nice place. I was able to remodel that facility and modernize it and create it in such a way that students could go in, get cattle fed, and then go back to their classroom and so forth. It was still 25 miles from their homes and the university campus, but this got accomplished in a fairly fast system. That was the goal. So I've participated in various either remodeling or building feedlot structures from the ground up, and I'm happy to have had that opportunity because it teaches us many more things about the interaction between humans and animals.
Awesome. That's pretty cool. And if you were to say, what, in your experience, your more than 30-year experience, what trends are you seeing in the market now? We've seen a lot of volatility and we've seen, quite high prices right now. What are you seeing? What are you expecting? What does this lay out for the cattle industry as a whole?
I think I'm still quite optimistic about this stage of the cattle cycle, and to define that a little further, obviously inventories are low,
Mhm.
prices are good. We have to be realistic. Those prices are going to come back down again in maybe a year or two. Um, have they gone as high as they probably could have? The answer is not quite yet. Will we make it there? I'm not sure. I'll get back to that comment here in a minute. As this has progressed, if we could use maybe 2014, 2015 as a reference past high price of the cycle stage, we reached $1.70 in late 2014. We're well past that price for fed cattle, which means we should be, riding high and comfortable. And the reality is we're not. The main reason that I want to focus when you asked the question about trends is that margins are narrowing in spite of better prices. Why are they narrowing? For a number of reasons, economic reasons outside of the fed cattle price. Obviously, there's an effort to change the base of fossil fuels, and that's affecting fuel prices as number one. Initially, there was an increase in grain prices. Those have moderated somewhat, which is helpful to the industry at the moment. One thing that is not moderated and will probably never go back to levels we saw before, and that's the price of labor or the cost of labor at feedlots. This is what makes me, and of course, in addition to that, inflation and interest rates hikes that we have seen for the last 2 years, which have forced interest rates to almost double for owning cattle. So if you add high feeder prices to high interest rates, and now the cost of doing business has gone up, the question is, will it come back down to create some extremely favorable margins as we had in 14, 15? And my crystal ball tells me likely not. And so that implies that the industry needs to get more precise in getting things accomplished. If the margins are going to be narrower going forward, then that means we need to be way better at hanging on to that margin, widening that margin by efficiencies in the feedlot that need to be gained as we look towards the future.
Cool. And for instance, I mean, talking about efficiencies and feedlot, what are, I mean, that's kind of that's a great way of putting it, efficiencies. What two, three things do you think that if you're speaking to a producer in your extension area, what do you usually tell them about ways of hanging on I think that the concept of hanging on to that margin and widening it up is kind of what the name of the game is right now, because that's sometimes the only thing that we can really manage is what's you're in control of, and you're in control
Correct.
of what's happening at the yard, the cattle that come in, feeding, the treatments, and the protocols that you put in there. So what do you usually tell, people that are in your area, in the Cumming County area, regarding improving and holding on to those margins?
Yes. So what I would focus there, and I've done that now for a little over 2 years because I saw the trends coming, and that is you will only have you will only participate in this bonanza, if you will, of prices only if you have the maximum pounds that you can sell, right? So if starting with the cow-calf operator, you have 100 cows, well, hopefully you will have 100 calves or close to 100 calves to sell. That's question one. So that goes back to fertility, for example, and health and growth, right? So, anything we do to keep them alive, to make them grow well, to make them grow efficiently, so that we can turn in as many pounds as we possibly can at this high point in the market, then we will be able to capitalize on these prices. For some of us that may not own cattle, you just watch the good prices go by and lick your chops because you just go, well, it's nice, but I don't have any cattle, right? It could be the same way if you had cattle, whether it's feedlot cattle arriving in the yard or cows in your cow yard, and little by little you're losing pounds or you're losing animals for whatever reason that is, right? And so now instead of having 100% of what you purchased or what you calved, you have less than 100%, and that's not a good position to be in because the prices to begin with are extremely high, whether you own them or you purchase them. So maintaining inventory, growing your inventory, growth on your inventory rather, health, fertility, nutrition. My one perspective, Ryan, that I've used earlier this year was simply this way: if a calf, let's just use bold and round numbers here. Say a fed steer is $3,000 at market time, and sadly they're not quite there yet, but let's just say they are.
Okay.
And a feeder steer at weaning time is nearly $2,000. Just round things up, old and so forth. Even say $1,500, so whatever. So you, in essence, have from 80 pounds, 100 pounds of birth weight to 200 pounds, and you can gain almost, $1,200, $1,400 in that margin, right? So the margin from birth to weaning is way more favorable than the margin from weaning to harvest. What does that say? Well, we have to be way more careful in the feedlot to watch our investment. Cattle that come in are susceptible to disease, right? We all know this. Any slip in management and nutrition, any weather coming in, it is a big investment. We have to protect it to make sure those cattle reach market, because those margins are narrow. And on the other hand, for the cow-calf operator, you may have almost $1,400 margin for, call it, 500-pound gain, right?
Mhm.
So that means you could spend $3 a pound to keep them alive and make them grow and make sure that their mothers get to settle and be pregnant again by the end of their breeding season. So for the cow-calf operator, this is the time to attempt everything that perhaps you haven't attempted before, right? What do I need to do to get that cow bred? Is there a mineral nutrition program that I haven't tried? This is the year to do it. Is there a creep feeding feed that you haven't tried, or maybe you haven't even tried creep feeding? This is the year to try. Have I forgotten to implant those calves before they got to weaning? This is a year to do that. So that's how I'm very strong in my rhetoric or my suggestions to producers that this is the year to cash in. What happens next year, I don't know. Hopefully another good year. But we have to take advantage of what we have right now.
Right. So you're saying be bold. Be bold. It's the time to be bold and try things that, at some point you never thought of, but this could be the year that you really have to dig in deep and go for that, is what you're saying.
Right. And in the feedlot, you don't have that much of a margin. I mean, doing some simple quick math, and I could be off, especially feed prices have softened even a little bit more, particularly depending on where you're at. But, costs of gain, a break even at $1.10, $1.20. That means you better be doing it for less than that, So how easy is that? Well, it takes a lot greater difficulty to get that accomplished because anything blows that efficiency out of the water.
Right. And that's very true. I mean, and what would you tell somebody in what best practices would you tell to somebody in the feedlot industry? Like what two or three things that you tell them?
I think my first one really it's in, it starts even as the moment as you load that mixer. Be sure that number one, that mixer is clean. And I mean, so all of the minor things and minor details around loading, mixing, and delivery are critical from, you know, any waste that can occur as you do those three actions, any, poor mixing conditions, which could come from dirty mixers, poor scale usage, trouble with overfilling. We tend to want to speed things up, and there is feed spilling out at the top of the mixer, etc. Those types of things are critical, in my opinion. Second, and it has to do with delivery along the same lines, is as we manage, let's put it this simple way. In thermoneutral conditions, cattle will handle a lot of ore mishaps, shall we call it, on bunk calls and feed deliveries and so forth. As weather turns warm, and it is coming, they're not going to give us that much of a break. And say we have a forecast for heat stress in 10 days. Well, it's time to talk to the feed delivery labor and say, guys, here's the new plan. In the next 10 days, we're expecting a heat wave. Here's where cattle are at. If they show you hunger, either don't go with them or go slow, instead of the traditional, well, we want to get them going, we want them to eat more, et cetera, et cetera. It's pretty soon we'll put them in that heat stress, right? So then the second part to me is be prepared for weather events, which are coming, right? So, do we have enough water? A calculation I made earlier indicates to me that number one, we want cattle to consume their entire water requirement in maybe 6 hours, not 24 hours, right? So in the heat of an event, they don't have 24 hours to drink 18 gallons. They probably should be doing it in 6 hours. So when you do a little bit of simple math on how long it takes for an animal to consume 18 gallons of water, it may take them 11 minutes, 10 minutes. So that means they stand at a water spot for 10 minutes. Well, how many more are not drinking because their friend is sitting there? So water access, water flow to me are the next things to watch as we look at what's coming, right? So weather events. And then thirdly, of course, any of the risk management things at the office level that a person can do, one potential way to gain on the margin, Ryan, is to evaluate the cattle. Are they the type of animal that will gain better, will reflect better prices if we market them on the grid, right? We put heifers of excellent genetic background, and we may deliver in on grade and yield or live prices. And I'm going, wait a minute. Those heifers could have probably gone, 40% prime and the rest choice, and that in spite of a few fours and fives on yield grade, they might be able to overcome that, gaining anywhere from $3 to $6 a hundred over the base price. So I think this is the year for the cattle feeder to consider things from the office that they haven't considered before, including grid marketing.
Oh, pretty cool. Yeah, yeah. We've seen a lot of, grid pricing kind of start to, increase a lot across different
Yeah,
that we have, and a lot of people just really starting to look into it, to be honest with you. It's
yeah,
something that, like as you said, being bold is kind of what people are doing right now, and
right.
looking into these new ways. And I think one of the ways that a lot of, uh, as you said, these margins are have to be taken care of. And I think one of the ways is the use of technology, using technology as a way, as a record keeping of being able to actually not have to remember what happened 3 Tuesdays ago when there was a storm. And I think that that is what is kind of a big spell in this whole beef industry. We always talk about like the beef industry being 10, 15, 20 years behind precision, precision crops, And this is where we start to pick up and start to see
Right.
this also, first in the yards and now going back also into the cow calf. So
Correct.
how have you seen this rise in technology, from the feedlots and both as as out on the field as a nutritionist, but then also as a scholar, as you've started to teach when you started in the 90s to where it is now, how has that been? Because it's kind of a
Yeah.
full question, but
Yep.
I
No.
kind of I always think about this like where people start in their academic or professional world to
Yeah.
where it is now. You start probably
Yep.
with phones or maybe, and then to having,
Yeah. No,
software
and
everywhere.
there's it's now you brought up something in my head that I wish I maybe could have saved it. If I work hard, I could find it. But we used to have these feed sheets in Minnesota when I was a graduate student in the late 80s, and then in the early 90s when I started feeding cattle at Minnesota, um, these feed sheets were actually printed by, say, the university print shop, right? And so we had stacks of them that were bound, right? You just ripped off the page and entered weights and so on and so forth. They were done very well by my predecessors, of course, and that's the way we kept records back then, right? Now for university research, we needed those records because sooner or later we were going to summarize the experiment. And, from this date to that date, obviously we had to have records and enter them in a computer, one of them chunky old computers, and then eventually get to a statistical analysis package that's still around today, obviously on different platforms. But at that time, we were using a mainframe computer. This is, so the interesting thing about this is that many of your listeners will identify with this. There was what was called a batch sheet, which was generated by the feed company. And then there was the feed sheet, which was, in the case that I've described, generated by the print shop at the university in our case. But it could simply be a book at the farm that, pen one received this many pounds, et cetera, et cetera. If you're interested in, back then, if you were interested in keeping records, you did all of that. If you didn't, you only simply had a batch sheet and did what you thought you should do that day, and nobody knew what you did tomorrow. You know, um, was that because margins were possibly wider? Was that because feeder calves were less expensive than they are today? Um, I'm not sure that the answer is yes to all of that, but there was you might say it was an easier way generally to not be able to keep records and still be profitable.
Right.
Today, I think it's going to be impossible, right? I don't know, in my mind, I don't know how many feedlots do not keep records. I'm not aware of any in my head at the moment, but I would suppose yards feeding 80 to 100 head perhaps may not keep records anymore today, or still today, but anywhere from 100 head and on. In fact, I'm working with somebody that is feeding 80 head of cattle, and I had created those sheets. I transformed them into an Excel file, and it's fairly fully automated for most things that are needed. I, in essence, gave that individual that sheet, that Excel sheet, and they're using it with 80 head, right? my idea is you need to know what you're doing, right? You really simply cannot operate without knowing what's going on out there. And then this obviously gets more sophisticated from that point. Once you start taking records, and the question is, are my cattle performing up to the expectations? Many of the new software programs have a equation that tells me how much these cattle are weighing. So when they sell, they were projected at 1420, they weighed 1480. Great. They weighed 1350. Oops, what happened? Right? That type of stuff. So we can begin to fine tune once we begin to keep those records. And so going forward, back to the labor concerns and the labor cost in the feedlot, one way to support labor and to help them help us be more efficient and effective is the adoption of technologies, right? Of any type. Anywhere you can think of software programs like Cattler that keep records on pens and on individuals, all the way to, is there manure records I need to keep? Can Cattler someday help me do that? Because that's already happening, and it's a whole set of books in another side of the office, right? On another shelf. But there's also, things related to what can I do with the technology I have today to improve things, such as can certain algorithms and programs have access to generate new intake equations based on origin, based on season, based on weight, that I can now say, well, instead of using a general equation that came from a public source, I've got my own equation. It's Alfredo's equation for this group of animals, very specific to that yard. And now I can track them, whether they're returning what I want or what I expected of those animals, right? I mean, a global equation is wonderful because it is of access to everyone, but pretty soon it falls short with the specificity of cattle that we work with. And so platforms such as yours will permit us that ability to be more flexible at a feedlot level, at a consultant level, at a feedlot level, at a pen level, at a source level, and I mean from there to the moon. And that should help us. I mean, is it possible someday to just program intake for a number of days in the yard, because you have a very accurate equation that is your own. So now the feeder just goes by the book. Today they're getting this, whether they need it or not. Tomorrow they need that, whether they need it or not. Obviously they need it. Obviously, that's the whole point of it. And so now there would be no detours, if you will, or distractions from that plan. And all of this is measured against the backdrop of a closeout. And if it isn't working out, it isn't working out. So it's a good thing to keep thinking about the future for that. So
Pretty cool. Last question. Buzzword around everything is AI today. We kind of talked about this off before starting to record. What thoughts are you with AI in the cattle industry, and how do you see that impacting? AI is a very big.
right.
It can mean everything. It can mean nothing. It's like
Yeah.
what specifically?
It's a pretty broad, yeah. I think it will be an asset sooner or later. I don't know when, right? In its infancy, similar perhaps to the example of that equation, right? So if I go and grab a global AI algorithm feature from XYZ platform, right? Because it's free. Very likely it will not work for me. It will give me erroneous information. Now, machine learning from our own feedlot, supported by a platform that can help me do that, so that I'm integrating all this information and it's spitting it right back out at my feed yard, in my conditions, with my personnel. I can see that happening. There's always going to be a margin of error. Equations have a margin of error themselves. And so we will, in other words, like back to that example of the 10 days, right? Maybe AI will help me say, well, these are yearlings, they're 700 pounds, there's enough water in the pen, there's enough shade, there's sprinklers, they're on a higher roughage diet, have at it. Half a pound of dry matter intake increases right up to the heat wave, and they'll be fine. Transform that to heavy finished cattle, black, hairy, first heat event of the year, about ready to market. Water is fine, sprinklers are fine, everything is fine. This AI or equation or whatever you want to call it is going to say, slow down, Alfredo. You're the cattle feeder. Bring them back to diet -1, not the
Yeah.
finisher. Up the roughage, and it can, if that thing can turn the mill or the formulation at the platform that feeds the cattle, why not, right? If it can change the proportions of feed overnight so that I'm feeding, diet 7 instead of diet 8, and I'm not increasing it, it will not let me increase by AI recognition intake for the next 10 days, more power to it.
Excellent. I'd say it on my end. I really do appreciate the time, Alfredo. I don't want to keep you up more than needed. Thank you very much for the time. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan.
Talk to you soon. Really appreciate talking to
If
you
there's
all.
any follow-up questions, I'm happy to tackle them.
Awesome. I'm gonna stop the recording and talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you. Sounds good.
Bye.
See you.